In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 14, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Pittsburgh versus North Carolina. Pittsburgh walks into Chapel Hill as the team that has to handle not just North Carolina, but North Carolina after a mood swing of a week. First, there was the buzzer beater against Duke that lit up every highlight show, then the crash back to earth at Miami when everything suddenly looked fragile again. Caleb Wilson hurt his left hand in that Miami game, and now the Tar Heels are staring at a stretch without their star freshman while everyone waits to see how long he will be sidelined. Even with that cloud hanging overhead, this is still a 19-5 North Carolina group, sitting comfortably among the elite, getting to play in its own building against a Pittsburgh team stuck at 9-16 overall with a 2-10 mark in the league. Pitt just came off a rough one against Duke that ended 70-54, and the season has felt like that scoreline in slow motion, competitive moments followed by long stretches where the offense and defense cannot hold up together. Oddsmakers still treat this as a spot where North Carolina is expected to win with room to spare at home, even after taking Wilson out of the equation. Honestly, that has a lot to do with how the Tar Heels behave in the Smith Center. They have been running up numbers on the middle and lower half of the conference, throwing 80+ on Syracuse, breaking 90 against Notre Dame, and generally turning home games into long nights for visiting defenses. This offense lives in the low 80s per game, shoots efficiently, shares the ball, and leans on a rotation where Henry Visar can punish teams inside and out while Jaron Stevenson stretches the floor and cleans the glass. The style is not reckless, but it is aggressive, and that matters when you compare it to where Pittsburgh is right now. Pitt is both short-handed and heavy-legged. Papa Amadou Kanté is already written off for the year after knee surgery. Deshaun Jackson has yet to see the floor because of a medical issue, and Brandon Cummings, who should be a central option, has been stuck on the sidelines with that ankle problem. Reports keep circling around the idea that Cummings might be done for the year or at least limited, and the latest notes still label him as uncertain more than ready. So the Panthers lean into Cameron Corrin inside, Roman Siolapa on the wing, Barry Dunning Jr. filling gaps, and while that trio can absolutely play, the overall profile has still landed around 70 points scored per night and more than 70 allowed. Defensively, they sit in the lower third of national efficiency charts, which is never where you want to be when you are heading into Chapel Hill against a team that likes to push the pace when it smells weakness. The one thing Pitt truly does well is crash the offensive glass, sniffing out second and third chances with that offensive rebound rate north of 34%. That is gritty and admirable, but it also means a long afternoon of collisions with a North Carolina front line that still has length and mobility even without Wilson. In a loud building, against a deeper rotation, that physical scrapping can slowly tilt from advantage to exhaustion. Here is the thing, when you put all of that together, the consistently strong home scoring from UNC, Pitt's injuries and defensive issues, the difference in depth, and the emotional need for a bounce-back performance, the spread does not feel like a trap so much as a test of whether the Tar Heels want to turn this into a statement game rather than a shrug. As our first pick for this matchup, the North Carolina Tar Heels to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Pittsburgh prefers to walk the ball up, call sets, and turn games into long, half-court chess matches. If you look at tempo metrics from places like KenPom, they sit near the slower end of the national pack, which absolutely fits the eye test when you watch them. The plan is simple: limit possessions, grind, and hope that a few key shots and a few big rebounds swing things late. The problem is that their defense does not always match the personality they are trying to project. They have already been lit up for triple digits by Louisville and have let multiple conference opponents push into the 80s, which is not exactly the stat line of a team successfully choking off games. Opponents shoot in the mid-40s from the field against them, which is more than generous. And when your main identity is slow the game down, giving up clean looks can turn that slow pace into slow suffering. It becomes a strange mix, deliberate possessions on one end and a leaky wall on the other. North Carolina, on the other hand, is not built to hold the ball and babysit a small margin. They are most comfortable when the offense breathes, when they can push on defensive rebounds, and when they can let multiple players touch the ball in the same action. And they live around the low 80s per game, and that is not just padding against weak opponents. Seth Trimble attacking off the bounce, Visar rolling or popping, Stevenson working as a flexible forward, Luka Bogovac spacing on the wing. All of that creates a flow that tends to pull the game into the high 70s or 80s when things go even reasonably well. Wilson's absence cuts into some shot creation and rim protection, which sounds like a reason to expect fewer points, but there is a twist. Without him, possessions tilt even more toward guards and wings making quick decisions, more ball screens, more possessions that start with push and see what is there, instead of walk it up and set up a post touch. That type of adjustment often helps scoring more than it helps defense, especially when the opponent already loves to attack the offensive glass. Remember, Pitt's offensive rebounding is real, and every time they extend a trip with a board and a kickout, the clock gets stretched, but so do the chances for second chance points or fouls. Game script matters a lot here. If North Carolina gets out in front, and the market certainly expects them to be in control for big chunks, Pittsburgh cannot afford to spend every trip draining the clock to 5 seconds. At some point they have to speed up, take earlier threes from Siolepa and Dunning Jr., let Corin go to work quickly instead of methodically, and that shift tends to nudge games away from the rock fight archetype. Add in the natural chaos late, where a trailing team has to foul, extend the game, and hope for misses at the line, and you get more possessions and more scoring chances stuffed into the closing minutes instead of a quiet fade out. Put simply, the combination of a naturally lively North Carolina offense, a Pittsburgh team that struggles to hold opponents down for 40 full minutes, extra possessions from offensive rebounds, and a likely need for the Panthers to play faster if they fall behind all point in one direction regarding the projected number. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Georgetown versus Connecticut. Georgetown heads into this one knowing exactly what kind of monster it is walking into Gampel Pavilion to face, Connecticut on a big February stage. Connecticut sits at roughly 23-2 overall and 13-1 in league play, sitting inside the national top 10 in both the polls and the efficiency charts, while Georgetown floats in that dangerous, unranked space at around 13-11 and 5-8 in conference. On paper that sounds like a mismatch, but from a spread angle it is more like a personality clash, a controlled heavyweight against a stubborn challenger that refuses to leave the ring. The market has treated Connecticut like a celebrity all season, and that kind of spotlight usually comes with a tax baked into the number. The Huskies are winning plenty straight up, but against the spread they have struggled, with a mark around 8-17 on the season and only about 2-9 against the number in their most recent stretch. Georgetown, on the other hand, has been more of a blue-collar ticket, cashing around 4 of its last 5 against the line, which feels more like a team quietly making bettors smile than lighting up SportsCenter. You see this all the time. The public piles into the big brand on ESPN, and the underdog that nobody wants at the window just keeps hanging around within shouting distance. Their first meeting told that story in miniature. Connecticut escaped in Washington by a score in the low 60s, roughly 64-62, in a game that felt like an old Big East street fight more than a modern track meet. The Huskies won, but they did not live up to their usual lofty offensive standard, and they certainly did not reward anyone who needed a big margin. Georgetown's style dragged the game into the half-court, possessions slowed down, and every basket felt like pulling teeth, which is exactly how an underdog wants it when talent tilts toward the other bench. Tempo is a huge character in this matchup. Connecticut likes to operate with a slow, almost surgical pace, trusting its half-court sets, its length, and its defense rather than trying to run teams out of the gym for 40 minutes. They are comfortable grinding, building a lead, and then squeezing the last few minutes like the final seconds of a shot clock, which is great for winning and not always so great for those needing a runaway margin. Georgetown is not elite in the efficiency tables but sits in that respectable, top 100 neighborhood on both sides of the ball, solid enough to compete if it does not hand Connecticut free points. One of the quiet strengths for the Hoyas has been avoiding sloppy giveaways, and when an underdog protects the ball, it suddenly takes away easy transition chances that usually turn a normal win into a blowout. History between these teams fits the same pattern. Connecticut has owned the straight-up column in recent years, with Georgetown dropping around 10 in a row in the series. Against the spread, though, the Hoyas have been far more kind, covering in roughly 6 of the last 8 meetings and repeatedly proving they can stick within the number even as the Huskies walk away with the handshake line. It feels a bit like those classic rivalry games where the better roster keeps winning, but the margins keep landing in that annoying gray area for favorite backers. Recent form only deepens that feeling. Georgetown comes in with 4 wins over its last 5 outings, including a competitive effort in the one loss, which is more pesky bracket team energy than punching bag. Connecticut, fresh off a rare stumble that snapped a huge winning streak and then a somewhat flat follow-up against Butler, still looks like itself, just maybe more focused on correcting things than delivering a style points performance. Injury reports lean towards stability more than drama, with Connecticut showing no major absences and Georgetown listing 2 guards as questionable but not confirming any catastrophic loss as of the latest notes. When both rotations are basically intact and the favorite already knows the underdog can make life uncomfortable, the setup points toward a methodical Connecticut effort and a Georgetown group that plays with enough edge, pride, and just plain stubbornness to stay inside a generous cushion. As our first pick for this matchup, the Georgetown Hoyas to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The last clash between these two landed comfortably on the lower side, that rough 64-62 type final that never really threatened a high total and made every possession feel heavy. Georgetown games since then have leaned into that persona with a string of results that have tilted mostly toward the under, especially away from home, as the Hoyas lean harder into defense, length, and patient half-court sets. It is not pretty, but it is effective for keeping totals in check, which is often all that matters for our purposes. Connecticut brings a bit of a contradiction. Recent box scores show plenty of higher scoring games, and if you just scroll through results on your phone, it can look like the Huskies are suddenly living in the fast lane. The truth underneath is more controlled. Their style still leans slow and deliberate, and their defense still has that smothering quality that holds opponents to modest point totals on rough shooting splits from both the field and the three-point line. Sometimes those late fireworks or a hot shooting stretch on one side can trick the eye, but the underlying identity has not suddenly flipped into pure run and gun. Georgetown's offense fits neatly into a lower scoring script. It is capable enough to score, but it rarely looks like a group built to turbocharge a game into a shootout against a top-tier defense on the road. The Hoyas can struggle to create clean looks for long stretches, which stalls the scoreboard even when they are playing well in terms of effort. Defensively, they are competent, giving up scores in the low 70s on decent percentages, and that is usually fine when the opponent is not pushing pace relentlessly. Against a deliberate Connecticut team, that profile leans toward another game where stops and long possessions stack up more than transition highlights. The personnel angle nudges things in the same direction, with Connecticut not missing key pieces and Georgetown simply monitoring a couple of questionable guards rather than announcing major absences. Nothing screams wild tempo swing. If anything, a slightly shortened or cautious Hoya backcourt would usually encourage the staff to control tempo even more, lean on defensive focus, and value each trip rather than turning the game into a sprint. That idea is a bit interpretive, but it matches how many coaches handle tough road environments when depth questions float around. For this matchup to land comfortably on a high-scoring side, one of 2 scripts probably has to hit. Either both teams would need to shoot unusually well overhand in the face defense for long stretches, or the game would have to tilt into extended garbage time with relaxed defending and quick, empty-calorie buckets. Those things can happen. Basketball is weird, but they are not the most natural fit with how Connecticut prefers to control games and how Georgetown has been living in slower, grind-heavy contests, especially away from home. The more likely rhythm feels closer to another Big East tug-of-war, more half-court chess than free-flowing festival, with enough defensive resistance and clock-draining possessions to keep the final tally on the leaner side. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full-game total pick. Kansas State versus Houston. This matchup feels like a storm rolling into a packed arena, loud, tense, and a little cruel for the road team. Houston walks in at 22-2 overall and 10-1 in conference play, a top-tier group that has turned its home floor into a no-fly zone for visiting teams. They have won 5 straight, stretched their home streak to 17 in a row, and stacked 40 consecutive wins against unranked opponents, which starts to feel less like a trend and more like a house rule. Kansas State shows up in a very different mood, sitting at 10-14 overall and 1-10 in league play, riding a 5-game skid that has worn everyone down. Fans at their last home blowout loss were wearing paper bags and calling for change, and the head coach did not exactly offer a warm hug in return. He said some of his own players do not deserve to be there and hinted that only a few will be back next season, which is about as blunt as it gets in college hoops and tells you plenty about the current locker room energy. On top of that, Kansas State is short-handed, with Andre Kostic, Abdi Bashir Jr., Elias Rapig, and Moby Ekagwurika all out and not expected to play, which trims the rotation and squeezes whatever flexibility they had. Houston is missing Cordell Jefferson, out for the season with a knee issue, and Bryce Jackson, who is sitting out as a redshirt, but their core rotation that drives their identity is intact and familiar with big stages. So one side is patching lineups and confidence, while the other side is running on continuity and habits that have been built over years, and that contrast matters when you step into a hostile building. Kansas State leans heavily on one prolific scorer, P.J. Haggerty, who is pouring in 23.3 points per game and creeping toward 2,000 career points, and that kind of volume naturally drags a lot of their possessions through his hands. When a team with thin depth and one main engine runs into a group like Houston that specializes in taking away your first option, the margin for error shrinks fast. Houston sits near the very top of the nation in scoring defense at about 61.2 points allowed per game, and they reach that mark not with gimmicks but with physical half-court pressure, sharp rotations, and a willingness to make every cut and catch feel like work. They have already handled Kansas State comfortably in the last 2 seasons, winning those games by margins in the 20s and 30s, and those results came with smaller expectations than the current perception of the gap between these two programs. The market treats Houston as a heavy favorite in their own gym, and honestly, it is hard to cook up a serious case that the thinner, shaken group is the one more likely to stay inside the number for a full 40 minutes. Between Houston's hardened identity at home, their defensive ceiling, and Kansas State's mix of injuries, morale issues, and reliance on a single high-usage scorer, the scenario where the hosts control things from early on feels more natural than the scenario where this turns into a wire-to-wire sweat for the spread. As our first pick for this matchup, the Houston Cougars to cover the spread as favorites is our full-game side pick. Kansas State's raw scoring average, just under 81 points per game at 80.9, makes them look like a track meet team at first glance, but the story gets different once you look at who is on the other side and how those points usually come. They also surrender plenty on defense, which helps inflate totals, but that pattern shows up more clearly when they face teams that are happy to trade quick shots and live with a loose rhythm. Houston lives on the opposite end of that stylistic spectrum, treating possessions like currency and running games at a measured pace that chokes off both easy looks and shot volume. The Cougars' defense, giving up just a touch over 61 points a night, drags most games below the national average in both tempo and efficiency, which matters more than any single scoring burst. They are comfortable playing low-possession basketball where every trip is scripted, and that comfort does not change if they get a lead. They simply keep squeezing space and forcing long, draining possessions. You saw that personality in their win at Utah, where they held the hosts to 52 points and just 2 for 17 from three-point range, a road game that still never turned into a free-flowing shootout. Now fold this particular Kansas State group into that environment. They lean hard on P.J. Haggerty to create offense, and with several rotation players missing, there is even more pressure on him to carry them through stretches where the ball sticks or shots dry up. Against a defense built to load up on primary creators, that setup can lead to those long scoreless pockets where the scoreboard hardly moves for a few minutes at a time. That kind of lull does not always show up in season averages, but it matters for a single game total when it repeats 2 or 3 times in each half. Houston's style with a lead does not really encourage wild scoring spikes either. They do not rush to push the pace just because things are going well. They tend to keep the same patient approach, use plenty of clock, and trust their defense to finish the job. That choice often turns the second half into something that feels more like a slow fade than a fireworks show, which is great for controlling the game and not so great for people hoping every possession ends in a quick bucket. Recent history between these programs points in the same direction for the scoring environment. The last 2 meetings have finished with combined totals in the mid-120s and mid-140s, both safely under the kind of projection that casual fans might expect when they see Kansas State's season scoring average next to Houston's national ranking. Those past results are not a guarantee of anything, but they do show how this stylistic clash tends to behave when one side pulls the game toward its preferred tempo. Put it all together and the most reasonable script looks like a controlled contest, with Houston's defensive pressure and deliberate pace dragging the overall scoring down from what a quick glance at raw averages might suggest. Kansas State's thin depth, reliance on one high-volume scorer, and vulnerability to extended dry spells only adds more weight to that picture of a game that feels tense but not especially high-scoring on the final tally. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Purdue versus Iowa. Purdue hits the floor in Iowa City and it feels like one of those classic February Big Ten tests where the walls almost shake before tip-off. Carver Hawkeye Arena is going to be loud, and it should be, because Purdue walks in with a record that looks like a contender, sitting at roughly 20-4 overall and around 10-3 in league play, right in that national top-tier conversation. Iowa is not just a speed bump either, with something like an 18-6 mark and a profile that keeps them hanging around the top 25 talk, all while breaking in Ben McCollum in his first season in charge. And the funny part is that the name on the jersey does not quite match the style people remember. Iowa has shifted from that old track meet reputation to a group that can actually get stops, holding teams somewhere in the mid-60s and rating out as one of the stronger defenses in the country by most efficiency lenses, which gives this matchup a bit more of a chess feel. Purdue answers that with an offense that lives in the elite neighborhood, near the very top nationally in efficiency, yet it often feels unhurried, almost stubbornly patient, with possessions that stretch, reverse, and probe until a good look finally appears. Books see this as a close one, with Purdue treated as the favorite but not by much, which makes sense when you look at the surface level. But once you get past the headline numbers, the way Purdue plays travels very well, and that matters here. They move the ball with purpose, pile up assists, and keep their mistakes to a minimum, spending most nights on the right side of that assist to turnover balance instead of getting careless with the ball. On top of that, they stack extra chances through the glass, outworking opponents on the boards by a healthy margin and turning missed shots into second looks or quick runouts the other way. Iowa's improvement on defense is real, but it has not erased every soft spot. When Maryland came in and pushed them around, the Hawkeyes were beaten on the boards by a noticeable gap and gave up a very high percentage inside the arc, which exposed how a physical, disciplined team can still bend this defense out of shape. Purdue fits that mold of a side that is happy to get into those bruising half-court possessions, wall off the paint, then walk the ball down and run their stuff until the defense finally blinks. Recent results back that up as more than a theory. Purdue already proved it can walk into a tough environment and survive, taking a road win over a top-ranked Nebraska team in overtime, which is the kind of game that steals a roster for more hostile gyms. They have also seen this Iowa team before, controlling most of the first meeting and finishing off a 79-72 win, which gives them film and confidence about what works in this matchup, even if both sides will tweak things for round 2. On the efficiency scales, Purdue comes out as a clear top 10 outfit with one of the very best offenses and a sturdy defense, while Iowa rates more like a good, dangerous team that still sits a step below in both scoring punch and stops. So when the stronger group on both ends is only being asked to win the spread game by a small margin, and it already owns the advantages in rebounding, ball security, and half-court execution, the logic keeps tilting back to the same locker room as the more likely side to cover. As our first pick for this matchup, the Purdue Boilermakers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. If you just glance at the raw scoring numbers, this matchup screams offense, with their season averages combining for a total that sits comfortably north of 160 points and their first meeting finishing in the low 150s. That kind of history naturally pushes people to expect another up-tempo, free-flowing game where shots are flying and the score bug on the screen never rests. Some previews lean that way because if you plug those season scoring averages into a simple mental formula, it feels easy to picture a game full of made jumpers and transition buckets. Here is the thing, though, the way these teams actually play possessions hints at something different. Both sides prefer a more deliberate tempo, sitting in the slower quarter of Division I by possession count, which means they are not in a rush to trade quick threes for the sake of it. Purdue often grinds through long sets, reversing the ball, posting, kicking, and using clock until the defense finally gives up a clean look. Iowa, for its part, has reshaped its identity into a group that holds opponents in the mid-60s on the scoreboard and has flirted with top 10 status nationally in points allowed, which is a wild contrast to how people mentally label them from a few years back. That new defensive seriousness for Iowa shows up in those nights where opponents do not even sniff 60. And while that will not happen every game, it tells you the ceiling for how low scoring their contests can get when things fall into their preferred rhythm. The second meeting factor matters too, because both staffs now have fresh film on every set, every counter, and every wrinkle from the first clash, and familiarity usually helps the defenses jump passing lanes and anticipate actions. Big Ten officiating, the pressure of February games, and the weight of league standings all pull this kind of matchup toward more half-court, physical sequences rather than a pure showcase of offense. You get more possessions that feel like job interviews, where every cut and screen is judged, and fewer that feel like open gym highlight reels. Season-long scoring totals and that first high-scoring result whisper that this should be another loose, high-number game, but the slower tempos, the sharper Hawkeye defense, and Purdue's comfort in playing through long, controlled possessions all steer this specific matchup toward a more measured scoring environment. So while the surface numbers nudge people one way, the underlying rhythm and style of these two teams in February suggest a quieter box score, with points earned the hard way rather than poured in endless waves. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Gonzaga versus Santa Clara. Gonzaga Bulldogs and Santa Clara Broncos meet on a Saturday night that feels more like a March test than a mid-February conference game. The gym will be packed, the students will be loud, and both teams know this one will get replayed on highlight packages if it lives up to the hype. Gonzaga walks in with a record of 24-2 overall and 12-1 in the league, sitting inside the top 15 nationally and carrying all the expectations that come with that kind of season. Santa Clara counters at 22-5 and 13-1 in conference, on top of the standings and still perfect at home, which gives this matchup a little extra edge and a bit of prove-it energy from the home side. Books have framed Gonzaga as a small road favorite, which already tells you the market respects Santa Clara's house, but still trusts the Zags a little more when all the variables are thrown in a blender. Gonzaga's profile this season is loud on both ends of the floor. They score around 87 points a night and give up roughly 66, so the scoring margin sits in that comfy 20-point neighborhood where elite teams tend to live. Santa Clara is no pushover though, sitting in the low 80s on offense and low 70s allowed, good for a double-digit margin of its own. On paper, that looks like a heavyweight and a very serious contender, and it mostly is, but there is still a noticeable gap in how consistently each side steps on opponents. The structure of Gonzaga's attack revolves around Graham Ike, and that part is not subtle. He is sitting in the neighborhood of 19.7 points and 8.5 rebounds per game on about 57% shooting from the field. That kind of efficiency with that kind of usage is why he is on Wooden Award watch lists, and why every defense in the league has him circled in red ink on the scouting report. Gonzaga feeds him on the block, uses him as a screener, and lets him tilt the floor, and when he drags extra defenders toward the paint, everything else suddenly looks simple for the guards, for the cutters, and even for the spot-up shooters. Braden Huff being out with a left knee injury for several weeks could have been a real problem, but what is interesting is how settled Gonzaga looks with the current rotation. The timetable that had him sidelined has forced the Zags to live in this version of themselves, with more time for other bigs and more clarity about who is doing what. Instead of shuffling roles every night, the group around Ike has leaned into his presence, and it has made their identity cleaner and more direct. Recent games have shown a defense that can crank up the pressure, like in that 83-53 thumping of Washington State, and an offense that still finds easy looks even with one talented piece missing. Santa Clara comes at you with a different flavor. Their offense grades out around a top 40 unit nationally by efficiency, which means they are not just running around trading hero shots. They space the floor, they share the ball, and they usually get to something smart by the end of the shot clock. Their defense is good, more in that solid and well-coached lane than in the you cannot breathe lane, which matters when you face a team that punishes every moment of hesitation the way Gonzaga does. Honestly, that is the tension in this game. Santa Clara's strength is playing clean and skilled. Gonzaga's strength is playing clean and skilled at a slightly higher gear. History between these programs still leans heavily toward the Zags, even though Santa Clara has closed the gap in recent years. Over the last few decades, Gonzaga piled up long winning streaks in the series and has taken the overwhelming majority of meetings on Santa Clara's floor. That does not mean this specific team rolls over, but it shows how comfortable Gonzaga as a program has been in this building, in this trip, in this matchup. The first meeting this season in Spokane finished 89-77 in favor of Gonzaga, with Ike throwing up 34 points and 11 boards and the Zags handling business as clear home favorites. Shrink the crowd energy in that game, flip it to Santa Clara's gym, and you still have the same basic ingredients, the same star in the middle, and the same coaching staff that has solved this puzzle many times. The game script that would favor Santa Clara against the number is pretty clear. Turn it into a slog, get whistle heavy, make every Gonzaga post touch feel like a wrestling match, and hope the home crowd drags the Zebras toward a slower, choppier rhythm. The game script that fits Gonzaga leans into rhythm instead, where the Zags use their size to control the glass, let Ike get comfortable early, and then force Santa Clara to play catch-up from behind against a more talented offense. Given how the numbers stack up this season, and how these two have already looked against each other and against the rest of the league, the small favorite comes in with more ways to separate over 40 minutes rather than fewer. As our first pick for this matchup, the Gonzaga Bulldogs to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Both offenses have spent the season piling up points, and oddsmakers have set a total that is clearly meant to scare off anyone who is allergic to overs. Gonzaga games land in the mid-150s on average when you add their points scored to their points allowed, and Santa Clara sits in that same general mid-150s band for combined totals. So the baseline environment is already high scoring before you even factor in the specific matchup quirks. Head-to-head, these teams have a habit of playing games that feel like they should come with a cardio warning. Recent meetings between Gonzaga and Santa Clara have regularly finished with combined scores in the upper 160s or even into the 200s, with only the occasional under sneaking through when the shooting cools off. The first clash this season ended on 166 combined points, which already cleared a lofty number, and neither side needed some miracle overtime to get there. That kind of track record between two programs is not everything, but it does hint at the pace and shot quality that tends to show up when they share the floor. Gonzaga plays with a style that naturally inflates totals. They shoot around 51% from the field as a team and hand out well over 18 assists per game, which is usually what you see from an offense that gets the ball humming rather than standing. Turnovers are not out of control, so they do not waste many possessions, and when you spend that many trips getting good looks around a star big, the math starts working toward higher scores pretty quickly. Santa Clara, for its part, sits in that zone where the offense is very efficient and the defense is more respectable than suffocating. That is a classic recipe for games where both sides score comfortably instead of dragging each other into low 60s grindfests. Injuries do not really push this matchup toward a defensive struggle either. Braden Huff remains out with his knee issue, but Gonzaga has already settled into lineups where the offensive core looks fully functional without him. They still have enough scoring options, enough creation, and enough structure around Ike that possessions do not stall just because one name is missing. Santa Clara lists no injuries of note. They come in with their regular rotation available, which means their spacing, their shooting, and their multiple ball handlers all remain on the table. Game flow could shift a few different ways, but a lot of those paths still lean toward plenty of points. If one side jumps out early, the other will need to speed things up, take quicker threes, and live with the swings that come with that. If the game stays tight, you get the full bonus package of timeouts, set plays, and late clock situations that usually reward good offenses rather than bad ones. And in those final minutes, if the score stays even somewhat close, you get the familiar sequence of fouls, free throws, and stretched possessions that quietly tack on extra points that did not seem to be there 10 minutes earlier. Scorelines in the low 80s for both teams, something like 82-78 or 85-77 or 81-80, fit very cleanly with the way they have played so far and with what we have already seen from this matchup. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.